Welcome to Classic Books Deep Dive, where we take one book, a stack of research, and we pull out the most interesting insights just for you. Today we're diving into Mark Manson's The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Feck. It's gotten a lot of buzz. A counterintuitive approach to living a good life, he says.
Yeah, and it definitely challenges a lot of the traditional self-help stuff out there.
Right from the beginning, you run into ideas like choosing your struggles and the feedback loop from hell.
Right. It's like, what is he even talking about?
So let's unpack some of this. The book starts with this story about Charles Bukowski.
The poet.
Yeah, known for being, well, a bit rough around the edges, but, finds success later in life.
And what's interesting is that his tombstone actually says, "Don't try."
That's pretty ironic, right? Coming from a successful writer.
Yeah, it's like he's saying effort doesn't matter, but of course that's not really what he means.
So what's the message there? How does that tie into living a good life?
Well, I think the point is that Bukowski embraced who he was, flaws and all.
Yeah.
He didn't try to be something he wasn't. And I think that resonated with people, that authenticity.
Yeah, that makes sense. Especially today, there's this pressure to always be striving for more.
More. It's exhausting.
And it can lead to this feeling of never being good enough, like you said, always striving.
Exactly. And that's what Manson calls the feedback loop from hell.
Right. You feel inadequate, so you beat yourself up about it.
And then that makes you feel even worse. It's a vicious cycle.
So how do we break free from that? Because that's something I think a lot of people struggle with, that constant pressure.
Well, the book dives into this idea of choosing your struggles.
Okay.
And it's actually tied to happiness. Manson argues that happiness comes from solving problems.
Problems.
Yeah, but the key is choosing the right problems.
So it's not just about avoiding problems altogether.
No, it's about being selective.
Okay. I'm starting to see where this is going. It's about choosing the problems that will actually lead to growth, to something meaningful.
Right. He compares it to physical pain. Like if you touch a hot stove.
You learn not to do that again.
Exactly. The pain serves a purpose. It teaches you something.
So we need those good problems, the ones that help us grow, that teach us something.
Exactly. They help us evolve, figure out what we value, what we want.
Okay. But how do we know which problems to choose? Because some problems, they just drain you.
That's where values come in. It's about defining what matters to you.
Your own values, not what society tells you to value.
Right. Because if you're chasing the wrong values, you can end up feeling empty, even if you achieve what's considered success.
He talks about Dave Mustaine.
Oh, yeah. The Megadeth.
Co-founder.
Yeah. I mean, he's achieved huge success in the music industry, but he still felt like a failure because he was comparing himself to Metallica.
His former band.
Right, which achieved even greater fame. So even though he was outwardly successful, he was measuring himself against the wrong yardstick.
So it's about defining what success actually means to you.
Exactly.
Not letting external measures define your worth.
Yeah, and there's the opposite example. Pete Best, the drummer for the Beatles, the original drummer.
Right before they made it big.
He gets fired. Huge setback, objectively. But he focuses on family.
Instead of fame.
Finds happiness that way. So it's a really interesting contrast.
Choosing different values leads to a different kind of life.
A different path, yeah. It really highlights that idea.
So this ties into another big idea in the book, taking responsibility.
Yes, and he's very clear about distinguishing responsibility from fault.
Because you can be responsible for a situation without being at fault.
Exactly. It's about owning your part.
Like that story he tells about his past relationship. He realizes that blaming his partner wasn't helpful.
That wasn't moving him forward.
Yeah. Shifting to taking responsibility, even for the negative aspects, was empowering.
Because it gave him control.
Over his own actions, his own choices.
It's about recognizing that we might not be able to control everything that happens to us, but we can control how we respond.
That's powerful. And it seems like that leads to another idea in the book, that certainty can actually hold us back.
Ah, yes. Certainty is the enemy of growth, he says.
Right. Being open to being wrong.
To uncertainty. It allows for learning and change.
Like that story about the woman who is so focused on self-improvement.
And she ends up with this really rigid worldview.
Right. Not open to questioning anything.
And it actually leads to some destructive behaviors.
Wow. So too much certainty can be a bad thing.
It can be blinding. And he points to social media's role in all of this.
Because we're constantly seeing these curated versions of reality,
It distorts our perception.
of what's normal, what's achievable.
Yeah. It creates this pressure to be perfect, to have it all figured out,
So we need to be willing to question our beliefs even when it's uncomfortable.
to be open to new information, to different perspectives. It's essential for growth, I think. And sometimes it means saying no
Say no.
to things that don't serve us, to values or behaviors that are harmful.
He uses that example of Romeo and Juliet
Oh, yeah, that's a good one.
to illustrate how romantic ideals can be toxic if taken to the extreme.
It's not about rejecting romantic love altogether.
Right. It's about having boundaries
Healthy love involves recognizing those boundaries.
and being responsible for your own well-being, not losing yourself in the relationship
It's about being selective.
with who and what we allow into our lives
Exactly. Learning to say no is so important for building strong relationships.
based on mutual respect, accountability.
Yeah, and it can be incredibly freeing, too, because then you're choosing what you want to say yes to.
Which brings us to this idea that commitment can actually lead to freedom.
Ah, yes. That's a bit of a paradox, isn't it?
It seems counterintuitive,
Yeah.
but he argues that commitment actually provides greater freedom, more profound experiences,
He talks about the paradox of choice.
where too many options lead to anxiety.
You're constantly worried about missing out on something better.
That FOMO, right?
Exactly. But by committing, by focusing on depth over breadth, you can actually experience more.
He talks about his own experience, shutting down side projects and focusing on writing.
Led to greater success and satisfaction.
So committing to one thing, going deep instead of wide.
Yeah. It allows you to fully invest in what truly matters.
And that brings us to perhaps the most profound idea in the book, death.
Yeah. It's a heavy topic, but he tackles it head on.
He shares that story about losing a close friend and how that forced him to reevaluate his priorities.
It made him question what truly mattered in life.
And he links this to Ernest Becker's work.
Who explored how the fear of death drives a lot of our behavior.
That we're constantly trying to leave our mark on the world.
Achieve things, acquire possessions, as if to prove that our lives had meaning.
That we mattered.
Exactly. But the irony is, by accepting our mortality, we can actually free ourselves from that pursuit.
So it's not about ignoring death or fearing it.
It's about embracing the reality of it.
Yeah.
And in doing so, finding the freedom to focus on what truly matters in the present moment.
That's powerful. Really makes you think about how you're living your life.
It's a reminder that our time is limited and that we have a choice in how we spend it.
So let's pause here for a moment. We've covered a lot of ground, and I want to give folks a chance to digest all of this.
Take a breath. It's a lot to process.
It is,
Yeah.
but it's also incredibly thought-provoking. And we'll be back in a moment to dive even deeper into the subtle art of not giving a feck.
Yeah, it makes you realize that a lot of what we stress about, it's just not that important in the grand scheme of things.
Right. It's about focusing on what truly matters. Our relationships, the love we share, the impact we have on the world.
And that really goes back to defining your values, like
Yeah.
we were talking about earlier. This book, The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Feck, it's all about creating a life that is meaningful to you.
Not based on what other people expect of you. But that takes work, doesn't it? It's not like there's some magic formula.
It's a process. It's a journey of self-discovery and growth.
Yeah. And Manson is very clear that it's not about being apathetic, not caring about anything.
It's about being selective.
With your energy, your
What
attention.
you choose to invest in.
And that takes courage, I think, because it means going against the grain sometimes,
Absolutely. It means defining success and happiness on your own terms.
which might be different from what society tells us.
Yeah. It's about figuring out what truly matters to you and then having the courage to live by those values.
And it's not always easy. There will be times when we doubt ourselves, when we make mistakes.
That's just part of the process, part of being human.
Yeah. One thing that really resonated with me was his discussion of how we create meaning in our lives.
Oh, yes.
He talks about this experiment where people are put in a room with buttons, and they're told that if they press the buttons in a certain sequence, a light will flash, and they'll earn a point. But here's the thing. The points are actually awarded randomly,
Oh, interesting.
but the participants become convinced that they've figured out the pattern.
They create meaning where there is none.
Exactly. It shows how our minds are wired to find patterns, to make sense of the world.
Even when there's no real connection.
And that can be helpful because it helps us learn but it can also lead to problems.
If we cling to beliefs that are inaccurate or harmful.
Yeah, like he mentions that case of the woman who developed false memories of abuse.
But it was influenced by a lot of factors, pre-existing issues, exposure to traumatic stories, and this trend at the time of repressed memory therapy.
It's a reminder to be critical of our own beliefs.
To be open to the possibility of being wrong.
Because we are wrong a lot of the time about so many things.
Right, and that's okay.
It's actually essential for growth.
Being wrong opens us up to learning, to changing, to evolving.
It's about letting go of that need to be right all the time. And he even suggests that our values can be wrong, like based on experiences or beliefs that no longer serve us.
To grow, we need to be willing to question those values, maybe even redefine them.
Like in that example he gives of the brother who's upset about his sister's engagement. He's holding on to this belief that her fiancé isn't good enough for her.
He thinks he knows what's best.
But it might be a misguided belief, and it could damage their relationship.
It's a common trap. We think we know what's best for other people.
But ultimately, we have to trust them to make their own choices.
Even if we don't agree.
Right. It's about letting go of control, realizing that we don't have all the answers. And sometimes the most loving thing we can do is just support the people we care about.
Even when their choices are different from what we would have chosen.
Exactly. And that ties into another key theme. Action drives motivation, not the other way around.
Right. We tend to think we need to feel motivated before we can take action, but Manson flips that.
He calls it the action-inspiration-motivation loop.
It's like by taking action, even if it's a small step,
You create momentum.
it can inspire you, give you that boost of motivation to keep going.
He talks about getting over his fear of talking to strangers by just forcing himself to do it.
Over and over again.
Right. And eventually, the fear subsided.
It's about rewiring our brains through action, proving to ourselves that we're capable of more than we think.
Another example is his experience with travel. He realized that chasing all these different experiences wasn't fulfilling.
It wasn't until he committed to something specific, a relationship, a location, a craft, that he found real satisfaction.
He attributes this to the paradox of choice.
Too many options can lead to less happiness because we're always worried about missing out on something better.
Yeah, I could definitely relate to that. It's like you're constantly second-guessing yourself. What if there's something better out there?
Exactly. And so you end up not fully committing to anything. But by focusing on depth over breadth, you can actually experience a deeper sense of fulfillment.
Okay. But committing to one thing means saying no to a lot of other things.
Right. Every yes implies a no to something else. That's the trade-off.
So it's about setting boundaries, protecting your time and energy, and making sure you're investing in things that align with your values.
And sometimes it's about saying no to things that seem good on the surface, but deep down you know they're not right for you.
And that can be hard, especially if you're a people pleaser.
It takes practice, but the more you do it, the easier it gets. And he even brings up Romeo and Juliet again here.
To illustrate how romantic ideals can be unhealthy.
Right. It's not that romantic love is bad, but that it needs to be balanced with realism and boundaries.
Healthy love versus unhealthy love.
Healthy love involves acknowledging and addressing your problems.
With your partner's support.
Whereas unhealthy love is about escaping your problems through your partner.
Okay, I see the distinction. So it's about being responsible for your own happiness, not expecting your partner to fix everything.
Exactly.
Which requires clear boundaries and a willingness to both reject and be rejected.
It's about recognizing that a healthy relationship is about two whole individuals coming together, not two halves trying to make a whole.
That's a good way to put it.
Yeah.
And of course, trust is essential for any healthy relationship.
Absolutely. He talks about how trust, once broken, can be incredibly difficult to rebuild. He uses the example of cheating.
Right. But it applies to any kind of betrayal, really.
Yeah, whether it's in a romantic relationship, a friendship, family, or even professional partnerships.
And he outlines 2 key steps for rebuilding trust.
The first step is for the person who broke the trust to acknowledge the values that led to the breach.
So owning up to the flaws, the shortcomings, the choices that caused the breakdown.
Yeah. It's about taking responsibility.
And the second step.
Building a track record of improved behavior over time. It's not enough to just apologize. You have to show through consistent actions that you've changed, learned, and can be trusted again.
It's a process.
It takes time and effort from both parties. Patience, forgiveness, a willingness to work through the pain.
It's not easy, but it can be done.
And the reward of rebuilding trust can be incredibly powerful. It can actually strengthen the relationship, deepening the connection in a way that wouldn't have been possible without that difficult experience.
It's a reminder that even in the face of adversity, there's always the potential for growth and healing.
Yeah, it's a powerful message. That even when things fall apart, there's still hope. There's still potential for growth, for healing.
It's about embracing the messiness of life, accepting the imperfections, and focusing on what truly matters.
And circling back to what we were discussing earlier about defining your values, the subtle art of not giving effect, it's about creating a life that is meaningful to you, not based on some external expectation.
Exactly. It's about figuring out what you truly value, what brings you joy, what kind of impact you want to have on the world, and then having the courage to live in alignment with those values.
And that takes work. It's not a quick fix. It's a journey of self-awareness, and sometimes a willingness to step outside of your comfort zone. Absolutely. Manson makes a very compelling case for the importance of embracing discomfort as a catalyst for growth.
That reminds me of something else he talked about, this idea of practical enlightenment. It's not about achieving some blissful state of detachment, but rather becoming comfortable with the fact that life inevitably involves challenges, setbacks, even suffering.
It's about accepting those experiences as part of the human experience, not as personal failures, and finding meaning and purpose even in the midst of those challenges.
He uses a great analogy. Physical pain serves a purpose. If you touch a hot stove, the pain teaches you to avoid it in the future. It's a feedback mechanism that helps us survive.
Similarly, emotional pain can be a catalyst for growth. It can force us to reevaluate our priorities, confront limiting beliefs, and make changes that ultimately lead to a better life.
So it's not about denying those negative emotions or trying to suppress them. It's about acknowledging them, understanding where they're coming from, and then choosing how we respond to them.
Exactly. We have a choice in how we experience and interpret those emotions. We can let them control us, or we can choose to use them as fuel for growth and transformation.
He talked about his own experience with depression and how he realized that by trying to avoid pain and discomfort, he was actually avoiding life itself.
It's a powerful realization that sometimes the very things we're trying to avoid are the very things we need to confront in order to truly live a meaningful life.
It's about embracing the full spectrum of human emotions, the positive and the negative, and recognizing that they all have something to teach us.
It's about finding the courage to be vulnerable, to acknowledge our pain, and to allow ourselves to grow from those experiences.
So how do we put all of this into practice? One of the key takeaways from The Subtle Art of Not Giving Effect is this idea of choosing better values, better things to give effect about. But how do we even know what those values are?
It's a process of self-reflection. It's about looking at your life and asking yourself what truly matters to you, what brings you joy, what are you passionate about, what kind of impact do you want to make on the world.
He also talks about the importance of questioning our beliefs, especially the ones that are causing us pain or holding us back.
It's about recognizing that our beliefs aren't necessarily truths, that they're often just stories we tell ourselves based on our past experiences and our conditioning.
And sometimes those stories aren't serving us anymore.
Right. We need to be willing to challenge those stories, examine them critically, and be open to the possibility that there might be a different narrative available to us, a more empowering narrative.
And that can be scary.
Right.
It can be unsettling to question the things that we've always believed to be true about ourselves and the world.
It takes courage and vulnerability, but the rewards can be transformative.
He talks about this idea of failure being a necessary part of the process, that we can't truly succeed without first being willing to fail.
He uses the example of Pablo Picasso, who remained prolific throughout his entire life because he didn't attach his self-worth to achieving specific outcomes. His value was simply honest expression, and that allowed him to continue creating and evolving his craft without the fear of failure.
It's about detaching our sense of self-worth from external validation and instead focusing on the process, the journey, the act of creating something that is meaningful to us.
It's about recognizing that failure is not a reflection of our worth, but rather a stepping stone on the path to growth and success.
And it's about letting go of perfectionism, embracing the messiness of the creative process, and allowing ourselves to make mistakes along the way.
It's recognizing that true creativity comes from a place of authenticity and vulnerability, not from a place of striving for some unattainable ideal.
And he even talks about how embracing our own mortality can be liberating, how recognizing the finite nature of our existence can actually help us to prioritize the things that truly matter.
He talks about the concept of legacy, how we want to be remembered, what kind of impact we want to make on the world. And that's a powerful question to ask ourselves.
Yeah, it really is. It forces us to confront our values, our priorities, the choices we're making in our lives.
It's a reminder that our time here is precious and that we have the power to make it count.
He ends the book with this beautiful passage about standing on a cliff in South Africa, feeling the wind on his face, and experiencing the profound sense of peace and clarity. And he talks about how confronting the reality of his own mortality made everything else seem lighter, less significant.
It's a reminder that in the grand scheme of things, a lot of the things that we worry about, a lot of the things that we stress over are really just trivial. What truly matters are the connections we make, the love we share, the impact we have on the world.
It's a call to live a more intentional life, a life that's aligned with our values, a life that is filled with meaning and purpose.
It's a reminder that we have the power to choose what we give a feck about. And in doing so, we create a life that is truly our own.
The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Feck is a book that challenges us to think differently about happiness, about success, and about what it means to live a good life. It's a reminder that true fulfillment comes from embracing our imperfections, choosing our struggles wisely, and focusing on the things that truly matter. It's a book that I think will stay with you long after you finish reading it. So tell me, what are your takeaways from this book? What resonated with you the most? We'd love to hear your thoughts and reflections on The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Feck by Mark Manson. And that brings us to the end of our deep dive. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next time.